Well, hey, Mom and Dad. I'm so glad that you're home from your stressful jobs providing essential services, because guess what? I've been working on my mouthpiece sirens all day, and I can't wait to show you. Alright, so the very first thing that I think I should talk to you about is making sure that it's cool for you to practice at the given time that you decide to practice. Because I know that it's not just students who are kind of hunkering down at home right now, and I know that parents are as well. And you may not only have a parent in your home, but also a younger sibling. So it's just really important to be kind of aware of those things before you start making any kind of noise, because that is the nature of what we do as musicians, and especially when we're practicing. We're not always making the best noises, and so make sure that, you know, your baby brother or sister has not just finally fallen asleep for a nap before you begin practicing. Or make sure that you're not practicing late in the night when somebody might be trying to go to bed, or likewise early in the morning when somebody is still in bed and doesn't want to get woken up to the sound of somebody practicing. Don't take it personally. Just know that people aren't always in the mood to listen to somebody practicing, and that's okay. In fact, you'll probably earn some respect for actually asking for permission, because that shows that you care enough to ask. And if you ask, there will certainly be a time that will be convenient for you to practice. Now for me, I live alone, and my house is actually surprisingly soundproof, so if I want to wake up and start playing heavy metal guitar at 5:30 in the morning, nobody's going to call the cops on me. My roommates aren't going to come knocking down my door telling me to knock it off. So I'm very lucky in that way, but I've definitely not always been in that position, particularly when I was in college living in a dorm room. You know, when you're sharing a room that's the size of a closet with another person, and there are at least another 100 rooms like that in the same building, when you make a lot of noise, people hear it and they don't always like it. I didn't make many friends my freshman year of college, at least in my dorm, that is. Alright, tip number 2 is that you want to have some kind of end goal before you begin your practice session. Now, an end goal like this can look like many different things, and I want you to remember to taper your expectations. Your end goal may be something grand, but it's going to take a year or two to get there. For example, if you were in the concert band and your end goal is to get into symphonic band, you're not going to accomplish that in one practice session. It's going to be something that's going to take many practice sessions to develop. But if you have that end goal of, I'm here and I want to get there, you're going to have much more productive sessions. Now, on a smaller scale, your end goal could be, I want to be able to play my chromatic scale 2 beats per minute faster. Perfect. Then you can start developing exercises in order to work out the tricky sections of your chromatic scale. And then by the end of your practice session, you can test it and see if you have met that end goal. If you haven't met your end goal, it means that your end goal was too big, or you weren't practicing quite as effectively as you could be. So both are things to take into consideration. However, if you just hop into practicing like,
alright, well, I'm gonna read through this piece.
and then you just kind of read top to bottom,
Alright, well, I guess I'm gonna read this piece.
And so on and so forth. You get through your music, but you don't even realize that your end goal was to get through your music. And so you have no marker of, well, did I get through it effectively? Am I doing my best on all of it? Did I work on my errors during parts where I was having trouble? Stuff like that. So my third practice tip is a simple phrase. Start slow. Stay slow. This is something you hear a lot, that you need to practice things slowly. And often I find myself, as well as other people, falling into this trap where you slow it down for a minute, but then you're so eager to get it up to tempo that you don't accept small victories within your slower tempo. When you're developing a musical passage or your ability to play a scale or any of those kind of things, any musical skill, almost all of it, aside from knowledge of music theory and stuff like that, has to do with the body and the musculature and the nervous system. Now, I'm not going to turn this into a bizarre science lecture, but the term muscle memory absolutely applies to music. And that means that when you practice a mistake, that becomes your muscle memory. And you know how you practice mistakes? Playing too fast.
You know how you practice mistakes?
Playing too fast.
So pick that slow tempo, slower than you think you actually need to go in order to get it perfect. And then just go through the motions, whether it's your fingering, your articulation, your phrasing. When you have to slow things down, you have to make musical decisions more adamantly because you have to commit to them for a longer amount of time. So not only does practicing slowly increase your muscle memory and your dexterity and your technical proficiency, but it actually improves your musicianship as well. Oftentimes people think that it's the hardest to play fast music, when in fact, after playing for years and years, you come to discover that slow music is actually way more challenging because your mistakes are far more exposed. However, when you know what mistakes you're making, you know what corrections to make. All right, now my fourth tip is to chunk. So when you're chunking something, it basically just means that rather than eating the entire pizza, you eat a slice of pizza and then save some for tomorrow. This seems like it might not be an effective tactic, but if you stick with the food metaphor, the entire pizza eventually gets eaten. And when you eat an entire pizza, we'll say it's an extra large pizza for the sake of this metaphor. When you eat an entire extra large pizza, it tastes really good in the moment, but you start hitting a point where your stomach is expanding and you're like,
I'm not into this anymore.
but the flavor is awesome, so you keep eating. And then next thing you know, you've got a stomach ache, you don't want to move, you end up in a food coma, and you don't want to eat pizza for another 2 weeks because you got burnt out on too much pizza. The same thing can happen musically. So let me flip the camera angle over to some music that I worked on in college. Alright, now this is a piece of music that I worked on during my time in college. It's a classical guitar piece. It has 3 pages worth of material, and as I'm sure you can already tell by the amount of ink on these pages, it's not necessarily easy, but I will zoom in and show you what we're looking at. So first thing I want you to notice is all of my little markings. I have markings everywhere, and these are based on, I'm showing my phrases. I have the word Darth Vader written there. So I guess for some reason Darth Vader meant something to me while I was working on it. So La Folia is, this is called Variations on La Folia and Minuet, right? So La Folia is a tune which is basically what I've had in view this whole time. You get to the double bar, and then you get to move on to the first variation. Now things are getting a little more complicated. You can see I still have a bunch of markings everywhere. Now, the point of me showing you this is not to say,
Hey, look how hard this music I worked on was.
although there is some of that. The point of me showing that is to show you a larger piece of music that I personally worked on so that I can kind of explain in context. So I would, for example, I would spend a practice session just working on the main theme of La Folia. Those first 2 lines that I showed you. I would spend an entire day practicing just that. And then I would leave the rest of the piece for later. It was something that I had to develop over the course of an entire semester, but I did end up playing all 4 variations, and I got an A on my playing performance final. So I think that has something to say about the effectiveness of chunking. Even within a single variation or the theme, what I would start to do is I would find the spots that I had issues with, either with my timing or my fingering or whatever it was. I would isolate those parts and I would just work on those parts. I have other sheets of music that still have sticky notes from like my error spots, and I would practice the part marked with the sticky note. It could be in between 2 measures, like something that goes over the bar line. It could be 2 measures. It could be 1 measure. It could be usually not 1 note, but it could be 1 beat that I would practice over and over and over again, grabbing the chord shape. So you have to, again, if you keep your end goal in mind, you can justify chunking in your practice sessions a little more and just accept small victories. It's not the end of the world if you don't get the whole piece right in 1 practice session. It's not the end of the world if you don't get the whole piece right in 1 practice session. Now, if you've been putting off practicing and you've got a gig tomorrow and you're not prepared, that's because you haven't been practicing enough. That's a point in time where you should worry. But if you've got a performance in 2 months, chunk that. So my last practicing tip for you guys today, number 5, the 5th tip that you can start using today to improve your practice sessions is to just do something fun at the end of your session. You don't have to necessarily be worried about improving a skill, playing something that you can't play, getting ready for some kind of performance. Let all that go and just improvise. Play a TikTok transcription. Do something that makes you feel happy, which, surprisingly enough for me, tends to be playing metal. Especially in college, in order to kind of turn my brain off from the classical and jazz that I was so focused on at the time. I would just crank up the distortion and go. So, since I've spent basically all day editing videos, shooting more videos, doing podcasts, writing emails, I think it's time for some riffage. Take care and stay creative.
Mr. F's online learning class. classes, some music and some fun for the masses. Thank you for watching my recordings, even though watching them is mandatory.